Hello. Hello, 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 hello. Oh, how you guys doing today? I went and hung out with a friend today. It was very nice to see her. Very nice to spend time. My little dog has gone over to my ex's now, and so it's just me in my apartment. No Milo today. Won't have Milo back for a little while. I'm very contemplative today. I feel very contemplative today. Like, what is life about? What is life for? What are we doing here? Major, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure, my friend. I'm really, I don't know, kind of stuck in a funk. Might be because I'm a little hungry. I wasn't able to get any food. So maybe I'm just hangry. Let's go, Cotton. Good to see you. A pleasure as always. A pleasure as always. So glad that you guys are here. Always a pleasure. You know, I think I'm just going to jump into the first thing that I want to talk about. I know that I usually wait like about 10 minutes as people come on in. This is a kind of an older article, but it's something that has been floating around more and more. I've been seeing people talking about the reality of it, which is millennials experienced a Vietnam War in the second half of 2021. CDC data shows the millennial generation suffered a Vietnam War event, with more than 61,000 excess deaths in that age group in the second half of 2021, according to an analysis by former Wall Street executive who made a career of crunching numbers, etc. In an interview Thursday with Steve Bannon on War Room, he said that what they found was shocking. The millennials, about ages 25 to 40, experienced an 84% increase in excess mortality in the fall, he said, describing it as the worst ever excess mortality, I think, in history. And this is just from the CDC. This is just from COVID. When you start to loop in and you start to link in the increased rates of suicide, the increased rates of mortality from drug overdose, the millennial generation is being killed. That once you start to zoom it out and start to see it from afar, you begin to see that we are already at war. That we are being killed off. And there's no other way to describe it anymore. That what we're seeing, like you think about what we're seeing in the UK, right? You think about what we're seeing in the UK with Liz Truss. And of course what they're doing is they're scapegoating her. The conservatives are all scapegoating her. And I've got an article here to talk about that. But the truth is that she's just the sacrificial lamb. She's just the sacrificial lamb. Right? That they're all putting her forward and saying, oh, it's new Prime Minister Liz Truss. It's Liz's. It's all Liz, right? Just like they did with Trump, right? Just like they did with Trump. Oh, the problem is Trump. Trump's the problem. We just got to get rid of Trump and everything will be better. Everything's fine. Trumpity Trump, right? So the system itself is showing that it's more than willing to scapegoat its own if it means protecting their system of extraction, which is literally killing us. At the same scale as a war. At the same scale as a war. And like, when do we start actually acknowledging and admitting that we are in a war, that this is a class war, and that we're losing? That we're losing the class war. And that as the war continues, as the war propaganda begins to wear thin, the parasite class, who has been waging this war the entire time for the last 50 years, will eventually just turn to more aggressive means of fighting this war. But what about individual responsibility? Yeah, that's part of the propaganda machine, right? That's part of the propaganda machine. If you can get people talking about individual responsibility, then you never need to address the system. This is how they defend themselves against systemic critique, right? That if the issue is that you haven't cleaned your room, or if the issue is that you're not pulling your weight, right? And you can always gaslight someone into believing that they're not participating enough. And it doesn't matter how much they are participating. It doesn't matter how much they are putting in. You can always gaslight them, and you can always convince them that they could do better. That's why it's effective, right? Because when people do self-analysis and self-critique, they're very hard on themselves, right? When people do, no one is a worse critic of you than you. That's something you learn very quickly as an artist. And you have to learn as an artist to stop being so hard on yourself. And so, of course, normal, regular citizens who don't attempt to confront themselves on the regular can easily be convinced that they are the problem and that they could do more. Because when a person turns the ire on themselves and turns the eye on themselves, they're highly critical. And everyone is very critical of themselves. And so it's easy to convince somebody that they could do more. And as long as you're doing that, you're not actually engaging in analysis of the system. And if you're not doing analysis of the system, then you're not trying to find, or you're not seeing that there are battle lines drawn and that you have enemies, right? As long as you're convinced that your enemy is yourself, then you'll never see that there are literally people launching a war against you, and have been for the last 50 years. Yeah, you can always be successful under any circumstance. At least that's what I tell Haitians and Syrians. I mean, like, it's become comical to me that, like, the individual responsibility line still gets carted out. Like, literally, we are watching the rise of fascist leaders in Italy, the birthplace of fascism. We're watching the UK literally plunge its own citizens into abject and total poverty. And anybody who wants to stand up and say it's people's individual responsibility, I think they're either fascists or they're so delusional, like they believe Santa Claus is real. Like, this is where we're at in the conversation. And my question has become, where are the serious adults in the conversation? Why is it that we're not having serious adult conversations and about the nature of the system that we are in? And it's because the system is doing everything it can to protect itself. And soon it will do so with violent force. And we know that that's the truth. The positive on this is that the fascists are weaker now than they were on the lead up to World War II. That on the lead up to World War II, men were willing to be conscripted and go and fight in war. I don't think that that's the truth any longer. Like, the fascists won in Italy, but I don't think they can conscript 500,000 men. You know? I don't think that they can conscript 100,000 men. Like, the reason why the mobilization in Russia is going to work is because the Russians know ultimately that it must be done. That they are under an existential threat. That they're being attacked by a psychotic imperial force. So they know they've got to do it. Right? That's why it's going to work. But if NATO attempted to do it, it wouldn't work. They would be facing open rebellion. Good to see you, Mystic. I'm always happy to answer your questions, but or at least attempt to talk to you. I'm not the expert. I don't own communism, right? So I'm so happy that you're here, though, bud. Florida is going to need communism to get out of the mess they are in. Oh, dude, yeah. Everybody's going to need communism to get out of the mess that they're in. Like, we are witnessing capitalism consume itself, which is what capitalism does. That it consumes itself and some states will become feudal. Like, it's just the truth. Like, some states will become feudal. And you think about people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and all of this kind of stuff, like, they're going to become feudal kings. Like, there's no avoiding it. There's just no avoiding it. I got a couple questions on communism, John. Let's go. Let's go. Brandon. Anemone, pleasure to see you. Pleasure to see you. I hope you're doing well out in the world. I hope you're doing well out in the world. I think about you guys, you know? I think about you guys. I'll be going through my day and I'll be thinking, I hope you're all doing well. Morning, John. The beard is looking good. Thank you, sir. I'm so proud now. I'm so proud. Every single time the beard gets to about this point, I've had to shave it because my skin would get so itchy. And I was complaining about it to my sister, and she was like, here's a soap. Try this soap. And I did, and it's taken the itch right out. And so now I can really commit. This, guys, this is just the beginning. You wait. This is just the beginning. It's going to get more and more majestic and more magnificent as time goes forward. I'm very much looking forward to it. I'm quite pleased. Florida is getting me banned from a ton of channels. Calling out rich beach owners and irresponsible building practices is not popular, apparently. Yeah. One of the things I've noticed, like, given the how the internet has ghettoized so many conversations, people are so willing to just ban people for anything, right? For anything. You can say almost nothing now on any subreddit, and you'll just be banned for it. Just for asking a basic question or saying anything. Like, the division and the groupthink has really set in. You're simply not allowed to question the prevailing narrative that exists. You're simply not allowed to do it. You will simply be banned, and that's become the culture now, right? What I think the conservatives are calling cancel culture, and I think that it exists, right? And I don't think that liberals and leftists are actually being honest about it, right? That they'll say, oh, look at the conservatives, they're complaining about cancel culture while they're on this big stage in a platform, and they're being platformed and millions of people can see them. But I think they're missing the point. I do think that what conservatives are complaining about is that, yes, they've got their group, and they know, but they see that when they go into, like, there's no place to go that is understood as a communal, we're supposed to fight. We're supposed to fight, right? There is no neutral ground. I think that's really where the complaint is coming from. And it's not being well articulated. And because everybody's in their little tribe, they're pointing out each other's hypocrisy. And they're all right. Like, everybody's got hypocrisy. Everybody's got, like, every individual has that. Right? We're complex, contradictory beings, right? And it's easy to point it out, right? You can point it out in everybody all the time, and we're constantly trying to develop and work on it. But I think the complaint of the cancel culture, right? The cancel culture is that there's no neutral ground. There's nowhere that you can go to air your grievances, to air your concerns, to be countervailed, right? Without fear of simply just somebody going bam, right? And I'm seeing that more and more, and it has become the culture, and it does go both ways. I get banned from conservative channels too, right? I'm not trying to defend conservatives, right? But by no stretch of the imagination. It just seems like it's become... I wish that this is the way that the left would begin speaking about this whole cancel culture narrative, that we are not creating a neutral ground. And it seems to be done on purpose. It seems to be done on purpose. If we can obliterate neutral ground, then everything is just constant conflict, and you'll never find compromises with one another. Which, I mean, we know that the United States military is completely disinterested in compromise. Right? The comedic narrative that said Russia is the one that's responsible for blowing up the Nord Stream, right? If you believe that, then you're gullible. You're just gullible. It's just simple as that. You're just gullible. Like, there's no reason for Russia to want to do that. It's the only way that Europe and Russia could have come to a peaceful solution, right? That the Americans know, and the Americans know this. The Americans know that Europe, when Europe heads into winter, they are going to want to sue for peace. And so the Americans destroyed the piece of infrastructure that was crucial to that peaceful arrangement, right? Right, that's all it is, because the Americans want war. They just want war. Oh, you're listening in from Australia, Mr. Moon. I love it. What's your thoughts on mega communism? I think it's a farce. Like, what I think it is an effort to discredit communism. That's what I really think it is. I think it's a way for the CIA and the power structure to claim communism for itself in order to discredit it and to make sure that leftists stay away from communism. That where the CIA wants people to end up is in anarchism. That's where they want them to end up, because historically anarchists are very easy to manipulate and very easy to get them on side. Anarchists will often work with the CIA, right? They'll often, and because they're so disorganized on principle, they're so disorganized, they're easy to work with. And so they want leftists to follow anarchist principles so that they can dismantle them easily. They don't want leftists to actually start organizing under communist principles, because those organizations are much harder to deal with. It's much more difficult to deal with communist organizations. But to get leftists to agree to organize under communist principles, they have to accept hierarchical control structures and things like this, right? And that's difficult. It's difficult for leftists to actually do that. Because part of being a leftist is accepting betrayal, right? Like, we've all been betrayed. It's a big reason why we are all leftists is because we've been betrayed. And we know we've been betrayed. And so it's difficult to trust again once you've been betrayed. And I know it is for me. Like, I won't even talk about other people. I'll talk about just myself. It's difficult for me to trust other people politically, and to find an organization and actually say, yep, these are the guys. I'm going to trust these guys. I'm going all in. I'm going to wear the t-shirt. I'm going to wave the flag. Like, it's very difficult for me to buy into that idea. And it is because leftists are constantly looking for the dagger. They're constantly looking for the dagger in the dark. And because leftists are often poor, right, holding on by their fingernails, right, even small slights are big deals. Whereas if you're on the right, like, you can have disagreements with one another and shouting matches with one another and then go home to your fucking mansions. Who cares? It doesn't matter to you at all. So I think that what's going on with the mega communism thing is just a simple CIA psyop. Very basic. Very basic. We see that communism is on the rise. We see that major institutions are beginning to talk about Marx. We see, and the CIA exists in order to dismantle and confront communism, right? That's why they exist. And so their strategy, I think, here is to claim communism, get it infused with an ideology that is incoherent with it, which is fascism, right? That's where your Nazbols exist, right? You fuse communism and fascism together, and this is a classic grift that fascists use. You can see this with Pierre Poilievre, right? Use socialist and communist language and aesthetic in order to sneak fascist ideology into the public, right? It's literally what Adolf Hitler did, right? Like, he took control of a socialist party. That's why you get all these idiots today being like, oh, Nazis were socialists, right? Yeah, because that's how fascists operate. They sneak in for using socialist and communist rhetoric, and then when the rubber hits the road, and the communists start saying, "Hey, are we actually going to do anything communist or socialist? Are we actually going to do anything? Like, we have power now. Can we do something about it?" The fascists will kill those people, and then just seize power for themselves. That's more or less what I see with the mega communism movement. That it's going to draw in a lot of gullible people who are going to listen to the like, oh wow, yeah, like workers of the world unite, and we should get together as workers, and I still love America and wave the flag and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, let's all get together and we can fight for the working class and come together. And then once they push and they seize power, well then the fascists will kill the communists, right? And then just take power for themselves. That's what will happen. Like, that's what mega communism is. It's a Trojan horse. It's a Trojan horse. It's to convince like gullible sort of people who would consider themselves like liberal centrists or Republican centrists, like center right or like maybe center left, that, oh yeah, I could vote for that guy, like I don't necessarily go along with the MAGA people, but they're talking about the communism thing and they're talking about the workers of the world, I can really get on board with that, blah, 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 blah. And they don't recognize like the fascists have an end game, and the fascists know what the end game is, right? The fascists are more than willing, like, and I'll say this again and again and again, right? You don't use Nazis. Nazis use you, right? That Nazis are only getting the communists into the room and the socialists into the room so that they can use them to further their aims. And then as soon as those people are not necessary to continue, they kill them. That's how they operate. And I think that's what we're seeing with the mega communist movement. It's a way to discredit communism. It's a way to keep leftists away from communism as an idea, and to associate communism with the mega crowd, and to ensure that reasonable people would never be communists. Look at the mega communists, right? So there's a lot of different levels to it. But ultimately, I think that organizations like the CIA see the threat of communism coming up. They see that millennials and Gen Z are no longer in favor of capitalism, that capitalism is a dying ideology strictly from a popularity perspective. Like, I will never support capital, like, ever. Like, I think it's a demonic ideology, and I think that there's a lot of people that think that way. And so now the CIA just exists to do damage control, and is trying to funnel the energy in such a way so that capital can maintain its dominance. And if they have to put a hammer and sickle to paper it, but maintain the structure of capital, they'll do it. Like, they'll do it. Like, these people have no principles, right? Their principle literally is maintain the system of capital. Like, that's the only principle that they follow. So they're not much different than Chaos Death Knights in that regard. John emoji. Very nice. That's close. I mean, I shaved the side of my head, but there's no emoji for that. Yeah, the itching stopped me from going further. Yeah, you can buy, what was the name of it? I have it. Come back around on me, Mr. Moon. I'll show you what I use. You guys are asking. Ask me this question at a different time. I don't want to go get the bottle. Can you be a communist and not support China, North Korea, Venezuela, and Cuba? Are those countries true communism or socialism? Mystics asking the big questions today, guys. And Ligand DZ is a good resource for this. Yeah, Ligand DZ is a good resource to listen to, right? Can you be a communist and not support? So I think that you can be a communist and not necessarily support those countries, but you've got to be careful because you can end up inadvertently essentially supporting American imperialism, right? that a lot of what you're seeing in those countries is a direct result of their combat and their war with American imperialism. That what we should be supporting in places like China, North Korea, Venezuela, and Cuba is their constant development in spite of the imperialist wars that they've been fighting against in the American empire, right? That there is no country that is true communism, and moreover, no country claims to be true communism, right? That what we are seeing is a development. That China, for example, calls itself socialism with Chinese characteristics, because they've wisely said that there is no one path to communism, right? That every country is going to have to come to that on their own terms and through their own way because of the history of their own cultures. I think that's very wise of the Chinese to say, because they're trying to avoid fundamentalism. They're trying to avoid people seeing the one true path to communism and trying to avoid a fundamentalist perspective. Places and like North Korea, like it pays to remember, like a place like North Korea was literally leveled by American imperialism, like literally leveled to rubble, not a standing structure, like literally completely destroyed throughout the 50s. So what you're seeing in North Korea now is a culture that's literally rebuilding itself and is literally like trying to get to, and then on top of that also simultaneously dealing with the conflict between itself and South Korea, where the North-South divide is still an ongoing struggle for those people. So I don't think it's really fair to critique, like, this is always my concern, is that Westerners especially are guilty of this, is we critique these countries while excluding the history of our own meddling, right? Like, if you exclude from the narrative that we literally destroyed North Korea, like blew it apart, if you just exclude that from the narrative, then you can point at North Korea and be like, what an odd fit, what a strange way they're operating, right? If you exclude from the narrative that China is dealing with CIA-backed terrorist groups throughout Xinjiang, then you can just be like, oh, wow, such a hyper-security state, and oh my God, right? If you just exclude from the conversation that Venezuela is dealing with heavy sanctions on oil that's collapsing their economy, then you can say, look at Venezuela in regards to socialism, right? So if you just exclude from the conversation the impacts and the effects of the CIA and American imperialism, you can essentially make whatever claim you like, right? Like Cuba, like, oh, the people of Cuba are so poor, communism's keeping everyone poor, and just ignore the sanction regime that's been going on since like literally the 1960s, right? So as long as you ignore these things, you can make whatever claim you like. And if you want to be a legitimate communist, if you want, which in my view, communism, it's dialectic materialism, right? It's observing the world through the lens of reality. It's using evidence and facts to make your decisions. Well, part of using evidence and facts and historical analysis is acknowledging reality and acknowledging that the reason why you have a communist nation that appears to be in poverty is because you have an imperial country off its coast that's keeping it that way. And these countries are struggling to develop and struggling to move forward because they've been cut off, right? So, of course, they're going to fall behind because they've been cut off on purpose. They've been cut off on purpose to do that. I would argue that places like Cuba are doing very well in spite of that, right? And that are if Cuba was experiencing the level of sanctions that it was experiencing but was run by capitalists, I think it would be a hellhole, right? But because it runs its country based on communist and socialist principles, you've ended up with a country full of solidarity. You've ended up with a country that understands that it's in poverty, that understands that we're all fighting this good fight, but we are doing it together, and we're spreading the resources around as best we can. Like when I was in Cuba, that it became obvious very quickly that like these people just need basic tools, like a drill. Like if somebody in Cuba had access to a drill, an electric drill, they would be able to go around and have a little capitalist enterprise doing that. Like that's how basic, and that's how devastating the sanctions have been. That like when we think about like, oh, they've been separated from technology, we think about like iPhones and shit. Like we think about smart pads and stuff. Like we are literally talking about things like drills. Like we're talking about like grinders. Like really extremely basic shit. And so when you think about how well they're doing in spite of that divide, well, that's because they've been operating through socialist and communist principles. And I could keep talking about this. I love talking about this subject because we in the West don't really understand how to communicate with other nations except through violence and domination. That if you're not dominating them, then why are you talking to them, is essentially the attitude of the West. And when we see China, especially China in these days, talking to other countries, we assume that they are dominating them. And we accuse them of imperialism just off the hop. And it's like, is it true? And a lot of it stems from our inability to imagine a country speaking to another country with the hope that we move forward with solidarity with one another. That we actually do have a win-win, and that there is actually a victory. We really, really struggle with that here in the West because our history is slavery, genocide, and domination, right, and white supremacy, and we just can't imagine a country not also operating that way. Yeah, and China doesn't claim to be the end-all of communism, socialism. Yeah. It's in the name, socialism with Chinese characteristics. Yeah, and that's also true. Like if you read the works of Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin, they understood that they had not achieved communism. Like they understood that, but they understood that it was a transition. And Trotsky especially wrote about like the withering away of the state and the withering away of capital and all of this, and how it would always be a transition. And so essentially what capitalists like to do is they like to come in to nations that are within this transition and start to critique it, which very much is like critiquing a painter when he's mid-paint job, right? Like it's got very much that same kind of thing. And if you turn and you say to them, hey, how about you fuck off, right? Well, then they'll just coup your government. So... God damn it, name the reactionary grievances that are real. Okay, we're going back to this conversation. Yeah. Overcoming capitalism does mean overcoming aspects of ourselves. No kidding, Mr. Moon. Well, this pluralism of opinion stuff like Christ, this is an age of fighting words. Censorship ain't shit compared to what is said. I mean, I think it really is like... What we're seeing from the right is the fighting of a culture war as a cover... for ignoring the class war, right? As long as you can get people to discuss the culture war and get them caught up in the culture war, then they'll never be able to talk about the class war, right? So, and I understand your frustration with this. Like a lot of it is like, what's somewhat entertaining about listening to people like Crowder and Shapiro and these guys right now is to see how hard they're working not just to not just be complete racists. Like they're creating whole code words and they're creating a whole like codified winks and nudges with one another that to the casual observer can be missed. But it's just they're like actively creating a new way to just say we're fucking racists. Like we don't want to intermingle with these black people. Like it really is quite astonishing to see. I mainly get banned from liberal channels. I can usually survive on conservative channels because I hate liberals as much as they do. Until I tell them they are actually liberals. Yeah, that's the only way you can really get banned from conservative channels. You're like, you know, you guys are actually liberals. Banned. That pipeline narrative is hilarious. All the liberal channels got out and said, we can't really know who did it. No evidence. Yeah, they just want to maintain the fog of war. Like, it's really obvious who did it. Like, it's so obvious. There is something to be said about the fog of war. Like, there is something to be said about that. But come on. Like, the Europeans are not going to do it because that pipeline represents their only path out of this conflict. The Russians aren't going to do it because that pipeline represents their only path out of the conflict, right? And also both sides have invested a lot of money into that pipeline, right? So it's not the Europeans, it's not the Russians, right? So if you're not going to say it was the Americans, then you got to come up with some kind of like terror cell conversation, right? And like, okay, well, who are they? and meanwhile, you've got like the U.S. Navy is literally there. It's just literally there already, just doing stuff. Like, come on, like you can't be this baby brained. You can't be this baby brained. Is fiscally communist and socially libertarian a utopia? Libertarianism is absolutely a pipe dream. There's just like no. At this point, I don't care to really even discuss libertarianism because it's so like. It just seems like. It just seems like a fantasy. Like, that's all it is. It just seems like a dream world. And like, and I don't really know what you mean when you say socially libertarian, honestly. Like, I don't really know what that means to you. Because libertarian itself is such a tainted word. It seems to mean whatever anybody wants it to mean. And so you got to go through this whole process of like discuss, like, what do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? And I don't really care to do that. Yeah, conservatives, Nazis were leftist, actual Nazis. We are far right. Yep. Yeah, that's what's funny. It's like the actual Nazis are very upfront. Yeah, mega communism is just an anti-trans homophobic movement. Period. End. I mean, it has that element as well, right? It does. That there are people in the world who are like, I would like to see a more egalitarian society where we could get rid of these trans people. Like, I think that is something that people think. That, like, yeah, we should distribute the wealth, but we got to make sure that there's no trans people there, right? Imagine if Florida had great infrastructure. Doubt we'd be seeing floods right now. Yeah, but there's a reason they don't, right? It's because they're ruled by capitalists. Fiscally communist means funding social spaces and services, which fosters freedom. The problem with capitalism is that it is radically evil. Yeah, that's the problem with capitalism, all right. Like, the system itself is radically evil. Like, it will always radically reform. It will always radically reform the society to collapse itself. Oh, Ligand disease doesn't want to be a resource. Okay, fine, dude. Sorry, I tried to trust you. What's communist stance on trade? Trade is peace. Trade is peace. Like, capitalists will try to gaslight you into believing that capitalism is trade, right? Or markets, right? Capitalists are like this, and part of that is because capitalists in the capitalist society are illiterate, that they don't actually know what capitalism is while they defend the system of capital, right? And I'm not talking about like small scale people. Like, I'm talking about like professors of economics at Harvard are illiterate on the subject of economics. I've become convinced of this. Just go read their material and then compare what they say compared to Smith or Ricard or Marx or any of these guys, right? They're literally illiterate in very, very serious ways. And so these guys are the guys that are walking around trying to convince you that capitalism is markets and capitalism is trade, when slave societies had markets, right? Chieftain societies, monarchies had trade, right? They had markets. Like, this idea that it's exclusively the realm of capitalism to exist in a state of trade. Like, civilizations trade with one another, regardless of their internal structure, right? And so the communist stance on trade, I mean, you could take a look at what China is doing, right? China wants to do win-win diplomacy. It wants to engage in trade with its neighbors. It wants to ensure that it can get access to resources in other countries while simultaneously helping to develop those countries. So it wants to do trade in like the best possible way, the best way possible to ensure that there's good relations. And I think that that's really the communist position, that rather than rolling into another person's country and blowing it up and stealing their resources the way capitalists do, right? You actually go to their leadership and you say, hey, like, you've got lithium, let's say, right? We'd love to have access to that lithium. And then that country says, okay, yeah, like, that'd be great if we could, but we don't have a road. Like, we literally don't have the infrastructure in order to get to that lithium. And so the communist response is, oh, well, then let's help you build that infrastructure, right? And that's a win-win idea from the communist perspective, because they get access to the infrastructure that you help build, and then you ultimately get access to the resources, right? Which is the whole point. And instead of, like, you know, kidnapping a bunch of children and throwing them down a mine shaft the way that capitalists do, you actually create a structure where there's equitability and equitability, is that even a word? But it's equitable, right? And that's the whole idea. And trade is peace. Like, if I'm a communist, like, I want to be trading. I want trade, and you can't simultaneously trade with somebody and bomb them. It just doesn't work out that way. And yeah, you don't need to have the private ownership of the means of production to have trade, right? Like, and that's where the capitalists get involved and start to parasticize things. Yeah, they think everyone is playing Warhammer 40k, and that's a fact of nature. Yeah, that's exactly right. That is how the capitalists look at it. It's like, well, we go around and bomb everybody and threaten them with death. I assume that's what you're doing too, right? Like, that is how capitalists actually, like, that's why they say that capitalism is natural. It's like a force of nature, because they're so invested in this death cult that they assume that everybody else is operating that way when it's simply not true. Yeah, socialized enterprises like Mondragon engage in trade, absolutely. Con, I love it when you level with me, Con. It makes me feel good. I'm going to level with y'all. I don't care what happens to reactionaries, and I also do not care if it happens through proper agencies. If a fascist deletes a fascist, good. So yeah, I honestly don't care what corporate censorship shuts up reactionaries, good. Now it's fucking even. Yeah, Cotton, you know, I always speaking from the heart. Always speaking from the heart. That's what I like about you, you know? And it's, my only concern is, like, if these institutions are willing to censor those people, they are willing to censor us, right? Because it's about just maintaining power for themselves. It's not really about building a civil society or anything. No, Mystic, please do not apologize for your questions. That's literally why I'm here. Honestly, like, I feel like I'm gonna steadily turn into, like, a communist guru, where people are gonna come in and I'm gonna be like, oh, and they're gonna be like, oh, great communist guru, please. I gotta get the bread hat, and then we'll really kick this cult up. Yeah, ask conservatives these questions. How will the culture war help pay someone's rent, utilities, education, basic needs, healthcare? How will the culture war help us find the cure for cancer? Yeah. No, they're not interested in that. Like, they're interested in maintaining their power. That's it. They're interested in maintaining their power. Like, the reason why conservatives are so terrified of black people is because they are convinced that black people will do to them what they have done to black people. Like, that is at base the fear that we can't empower the black population. We can't give the black population a stake in the society. We can't enable them. We can't do any of that because we assume that their objective is to enslave us. right? And we assume that because that's what we did to them. And frankly, what many of us would like to continue doing to them. So, like, the question really is, like, what's wrong with white people? Like, what's wrong with white culture? What's wrong with white civilization? There's something that has gone desperately wrong with us. And I don't think it's unfair to ask that question. You know, like, why are we so dedicated to slavery? Why are we so dedicated to the open destruction of civilization? Why is it that we don't think we can actually negotiate with a society? Like, why are we so terrified of a society that stands up? We're going to be egalitarian. We're going to try to build an egalitarian society. Why do we feel the need to coup those governments? Why do we feel a need to go in and destroy them at all? Right? At all. Like, to me, these are central questions of how we want to interact with the world and how we want to be on the world stage, right? Is Singapore a socialist utopia? I don't know enough about Singapore to actually comment on it. Like every culture, they have their foibles, they have their ups, they have their downs. They can be critiqued, right? But again, I don't know enough about Singapore to talk about it, so I'm not going to. I know you're a communist when it comes to fiscal stuff, but what are your social stances? I think that I can describe my social stances simply as every person should be able to do with their own body and with their own self whatever they think is right. As long as it doesn't invade other people's territory, right? As long as you're not telling another person to act in a certain way, right? Like, and you can tell a person, like, this is how I expect to be treated. But, like, whatever you think is going on, I'm going to believe you. And I'm not going to think that that's bad. Like, if a person says, yeah, I'm gay, right? I'm going to be like, great. I'm going to believe them. And I'm going to be like, okay, great. Like, that's how it is for you. Because you know more about you than I do, certainly, and moreover, my opinion of what it is that you identify as or what it is that you are is essentially irrelevant, right? It's the highest form of arrogance possible is to look at another person as they're saying identify as whatever and saying no you don't, or that's weird, or any of that kind of stuff. Like, that's just like the highest form of arrogance. You can't go higher. Like, a person just informed you about something of the that is true about themselves, and your response is either revulsion or denial. That's just arrogance. It's just complete arrogance. And you'll find that that's basically my stance across the board, right? Any of the culture war stuff, the abortion issue, that's essentially where I land, right? Like, I'm essentially like, oh, like, this is an issue that affects you, like, and it's your thing and it's your individual kind of position, and obviously you know more about yourself than anybody else does, right? You are the expert of yourself, right? Like, that's just fundamentally the truth. Nobody knows more about yourself than you do. Maybe you can find guides, maybe you can find people to help lead you down a path of self-discovery, but no one will be able to help you discover who you are, right? That is exclusively your work, and it is exclusively your right to stand up and say, this is who I am. And if somebody is going to attempt to tell you that you're not that, then they're arrogant at the highest possible level. Like as arrogant as like any narcissist you've ever met. What's communist taste in architecture? As long as it gets rid of homelessness. The communists often get critiqued because they made these big blocky, structures that are stable, can withstand weather, and also eliminate homelessness. Right? Like, people will often say, oh, Soviet architecture is so ugly. My response has become, homelessness is ugly. Homelessness is ugly. right? Compton, I feel that you've got the spice in you today, bud. I feel it. I feel you've got spice going on in you, bud. Where are you feeling it? Where do you feel the spice today? Like, where in your body? Tell me, where in your body do you feel the spice? Okay, then we nationalize the internet into a public square. Yeah, I agree with this completely. And censor the fucking reactionaries anyway, as the criminals that they are. And for those of you who are just listening in, Compton wrote that in capitals. Yeah, I mean, don't let Nazis talk. Like, Nazis aren't trying to debate in good faith, right? Absolutely. No, I absolutely think that's true. Like, and there is, and to me, it's not a free speech issue. Like, there's a difference between coming forward with ideas and talking about something and inciting violence, right? And Nazism at its core incites violence, right? It's not trying to spread ideas. It's not trying to compromise and create new modes of existence. It's trying to eradicate people, right? That Nazism is an incitement of violence. And we all agree, like, this is a normal position, right? Like, if somebody stands up in a crowded theater and starts shouting, "Fire, fire," there's a fire, everyone needs to evacuate, right? It's not protected speech. It's not free speech. That person can't make a free speech claim, right? They're inciting violence. They're inciting action, right? Like, it's incitement is a crime, right? And this is what the right has actually, what they're actually arguing in favor of, is the legalization of incitement. That you can literally, they genuinely believe that they can incite violence and then be like, "That's my freedom of speech," right? And it's completely false. There is literally not even a single line anywhere written anywhere that protects someone's rights to incite violence. And that's what Nazism is. It's just an incitement of violence at, like, the deepest level. Well, and I do not give, Compton writes, I do not give a single shit about being fairly with them. Well, because they're not trying to be fair with you. Like, this to me is the greatest truth about Nazism and Nazis generally, is that, like, Karl Polanyi wrote the paradox of tolerance, and I actually completely disagree with it. It's not a paradox to deal with Nazis in this way, right? For those who don't know, the paradox of tolerance is that we need to tolerate everything except intolerance, and so there's a paradox, and it's like, but that's not true, right? That when we are passing laws and when we are agreeing with one another and compromising with one another, right, about how to run a society, the base assumption of all agreements is that they apply universally, right? So if you make a very simple rule, like do not murder, well, the assumption is that if even the rich guy pulls out a gun and shoots someone, then the rich guy faces consequences, and that there is a universality. Like, no one's allowed to park here. Well, that includes the guy who has the Lamborghini, right? Like, that includes the rich guy, right? And so what the Nazis do is they stand up and they say, oh, we don't think the rules should apply to us, right? We think that we should be exempt from certain rules, or we think that certain groups should exist in different rules. And so we say to that, okay, right, we'll agree with you. It's just that we're going to say that to the Nazis. Oh, you want there to be special rules for specific groups? Oh, okay, then those special rules will apply to the Nazis. And so there's no paradox. We're actually just abiding by the Nazis' own rules and just turning it back on them and saying, oh, you want to round up and eradicate ethnic groups or people based on their political groups? Like, that's the core of Nazism, right? If you don't want to eradicate some sort of weak group, then you're not a Nazi. And so then we say, okay, great. We'll go along with that, and the group that we choose is Nazis. So we're just saying to them, yeah, if you want to be a Nazi, great, then this is what this looks like. And we're not going to negotiate with them. We're going to just accept their position and then use it against them because it's their own position, right? They just don't like that the group that we chose was Nazis. Like, that's the funny part about these Nazis, is that they're literally, like, when they say things like, who's the real Nazi now? Looks like you're the real Nazi now. It's like, no, dude, you're still the Nazi. We're just agreeing with you. It's my favorite thing to do whenever I end up in a debate or a conversation with somebody. It's just to agree with them, right? Like, I don't butt heads with people on the typical kind of things. So, like, the abortion issue, and I'm really on the abortion one right now because I had a big conversation with somebody about it yesterday at the protest I was at. A lovely young lady who was very genuine with her questions with me and all of that. Like, on the question of, is a fetus a life? Right? People can get really caught up on that, and there can be a lot of debate about that, and it can be a big kind of thing. Like, birth begins at conception, or life begins at conception. That could be a big sticking point for people on the pro-life side of the conversation. And I just concede the point. I don't debate them. Sure. Life begins at conception. Sure. Yeah, I'll completely agree with that. I'm fine with that. Right? The decision for the abortion is still in the hands of the woman and still in the hands of the professional, the doctor on the scene. Like, those are the only people who need to be involved in the decision making. We don't need to pass a policy. There doesn't need to be a state apparatus. There doesn't need to be a law. And that's true even if life begins at conception. So I just concede the point. And what I've come to find is that most of the time, if you just concede most of what they're saying and just agree with them, they're still wrong. Like, to me, it's like the number one way to completely defang your opposition. You just agree with them. You just say, yep, that's right. Absolutely. Yep, that's right. All of that is true. You are still wrong. Because they always are. They're always wrong. Because they're not rooting what they're saying in reality, right? They're not rooting what they're saying in on the ground, right? So take the abortion issue, right? The people who are pro-life people, even the ones who are acting in good faith, and I assume that there are those who are acting in good faith, right? They don't want to accept that there's simply a Kobayashi Maru. They don't want to accept that there's just a lose-lose. You know, there is such a thing as a situation where there cannot be a winner, right? Where the circumstance is that the mother is going to die unless she has an abortion. The circumstance is that if this woman is to have this baby, it will be born into total grinding poverty and despair, right? Like, these situations exist. And the people who should have the right to decide these issues is exclusively the pregnant woman and the doctor who is overseeing her pregnancy. And that's exclusively the truth. Even if life begins at conception. And I go so far to say as because life begins at conception, I've conceded the point. Because life begins at conception, it makes it even more important for the woman to have the choice. Right? That there is no, that all that does is raise the stakes for her. Right? That's all that does. And this mythical idea that they create in their minds of, like, the floozy woman who just goes and gets pregnant and gets an abortion, gets pregnant, gets an abortion, all that kind of stuff. It just doesn't exist. Certainly not on the scale that they think it does. And they just don't want to deal with questions of, like, maybe we should make life good. Maybe we should create support systems. No, none of that. Oh, bootstrap yourself? Okay. Right? And you just see that they're just engaging in a childish narrative. Anyway. So you are socially egalitarian. I don't necessarily know what you mean when you say that. You're socially egalitarian. I mean, I believe in the principles of egalitarianism, that everybody should be taken care of, that resources should be used to support one another, that what we're doing now with this resource hoarding is just absolutely disgusting. But, like, what do you mean by socially egalitarian? Mr. Moon, communist architectures, building serving human need, not rent extraction, toll booth commodities. Yep. Hold on, wait a minute. Serving human need? I thought that we were feeding a death god. How do we not feed a death god? Like, if we don't feed the death god, then that'll collapse the economy. I was a libertarian. This is from Mystic. I was a libertarian troll. A year ago, I was finding leftist channels to troll, and then I found John, Canadian commie. I was trolling at first, and then I found John interesting, genuine, and he grew on me. Well, isn't that lovely, Mystic? Isn't that absolutely lovely, bud? That warms my heart, you know? That makes my heart warm. You know, sometimes I think to myself, what am I doing this channel for? Like, what is this? But then it's comments like that that remind me, you know, that's what I'm doing it for. Because I am here to change hearts and minds. I do believe that we can build a society that cares about itself. I do believe that we can be a society that loves itself. And we don't love ourselves now. And the type of people and the type of self-love that I'm seeing it's not love. Right? It's not love. It's like a form of self-flagellation, what I'm seeing. And so if I can change one person, I can change another. Thanks, Mystic. It's very kind of you to say. Communists stole my parking space. Fantastic. Ah, yes, the Death God. Dark Eldars literally torture people to ward off Slanesh from taking their asses. Yeah, what a fucking... It's funny how Warhammer becomes like a pretty good analogy, right? Got a ridiculous question. Is Star Trek a communist utopia? Yeah. Yep. That's what made the original Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation so dangerous. And that's why modern Star Trek sucks. Like, modern Star Trek sucks so bad because the original Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation, and to a degree Deep Space Nine, were trying to what they would do is they would take strong positions on social issues and then defend those positions, right? Like, you don't see that in television anymore. That's not what modern television is about. It's not what modern storytelling is about, if you want to call it storytelling, right? Modern storytelling is just power fantasy. Like, that really is what modern storytelling is all about. It's just about worshiping the protagonist, right? Going on a roller coaster, right? Experiencing the world through the eyes of this extremely powerful being, and going on a power fantasy. That's what modern storytelling, if you want to call it storytelling, is. And Star Trek really shows you, like, if you go and you watch the original Star Trek and the original Star Trek movies, and Star Trek The Next Generation, what you see is a form of storytelling that takes a social issue, a modern social issue, puts it in a science fiction context, and then takes a strong position on that social issue and defends it. And is usually taking a strong position from the socialist or the communist position. And what I value so much about the original Star Trek stuff and Next Gen is exactly that it was at least attempting to confront these issues and was attempting to have very difficult conversations, which is why the original Star Trek and the original Star Trek movies and Star Trek The Next Generation are adults and they're mature, right? Because they're very serious and they're very seriously trying to confront these issues, and they're very serious people having these serious discussions. Whereas modern storytelling is just children writing children's shit for children. Like the modern Star Trek movies, like the remake Star Trek movies, like those versions of Kirk, Spock, and the rest of them are basically children. They would never in a million years be permitted to step aboard a starship. let alone run one, right? The fact that that version of Kirk becomes the captain of a flagship is an embarrassment. And anybody should see that. It should be obvious, right? Like, look at the way they act. At one point, Spock literally decommissions the captain and shoots Kirk from in a missile and abandons him on a planet. Like, this is not something that adults would do. This is not something that starship captains would do. And if the expectation of not only the author but also the audience is that this is how the leaders of like high space-faring naval vessels should act, then our standards are in the toilet. And like, if you watch that and think anything other than this is for babies, like this isn't something that I would even let my kids watch. Like, I wouldn't let my kids watch. Like, if they wanted to watch it and they watch it by themselves, fine. But I'm never gonna sit down with them and watch it with them because it's trash. It's garbage. It teaches them that adults are incompetent losers who are just making shit up on the fly, and that the only solution that can ever be found is through the barrel of a gun. Like, their remake of Khan, of The Wrath of Khan, was shit. It was total garbage. It was dreck. It was trash. It wasn't even that visually appealing. We got like one good scene from Cumberbatch, right? And that was basically it. But it had no stakes. It was completely empty of any value whatsoever, right? And there's a reason why they're killing. There's a reason why they're destroying our heroes. There's a reason why they're destroying our franchises. There's a reason why they're going after it. Because they never want us to have adult conversations again. They never want us to be able to say, hey, isn't the system of capital actually oppressing us? They never want us to create situations and create sympathetic characters who have adult conversations about the realities of our lives. Because if we watch that happen on the big screen, we might actually go, oh, that's happening to me. And we might actually take some of the solutions that we see from these stories and use them in our own lives. And they know it. That's why James Kirk needs to just become an idiot. That's why Spock needs to become worthless. That and it's across the board, by the way. That's why Luke Skywalker needs to become a dried up, pathetic old man, right? That's hero after hero after hero. Like, pick a franchise. They're resurrecting them in order to kill them. That's what they're doing, and they're doing it on purpose, so that the next generation of children will have no heroes. And not only will they have no heroes, they won't even believe in the concept of heroism. They won't believe that goodness is possible. That there is no such thing as evil versus good. And that you can't actually overwhelm evil because it doesn't exist in the first place. I'm thinking of starting to watch Star Trek. Can you tell me which Star Trek I should watch and which I should avoid? Star Trek Next Generation. Like, if you don't watch Star Trek Next Generation, you haven't watched Star Trek, period. The old stuff is really hit or miss. Like, some episodes are good, some episodes are bad. They mainly struggle with budget. And also they're, like, developing the concept, you know, in the original Star Trek. Star Trek Next Generation is more developed. The idea of the Prime Directive, right? The idea of the Prime Directive, which becomes central. Like, when you really think about it, okay? The concept of the Prime Directive is a radical idea. It is a radical idea. What's the Prime Directive? Right? The Prime Directive is to not interfere in the development of other cultures. That's the Prime Directive. Are we doing the Prime Directive today, do you think? Do you think that we as Americans and as Canadians are following the Prime Directive? Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. So you see how dangerous the concept of the ideas within Star Trek are, to the capitalist death cult. What happens if the culture suddenly does start to believe in something like a prime directive? What happens if the entire culture starts to go, yeah, wait a minute, we should stop interfering in the development of other cultures? Well, there goes imperialism, right? Star Trek The Next Generation had within it some of the strongest anti-imperialist statements that exist on television ever. And you should absolutely watch Star Trek Next Generation. 100%. Deep Space Nine is also good because it gets muddier. Like, Next Gen is very unabashedly Shakespearean and unabashedly heroic. The humans are heroes in Next Generation, unabashedly so. It gets muddier. It gets muddier in Deep Space Nine. Voyager is bad. Terrible writing. They abandoned the premise from the outset. They didn't know what to do. And eventually they just introduce hot Borg woman to keep people watching. And then everything after Voyager is just a disaster. Like, don't even bother. Loved McMurdy's The Cancer Stage of Capitalism. Very convincing. Likens capitalism to a disease. Speaking of worshipping death, yeah. Broccoli Cheddar Rice, good to see you. Glad you agree. Mr. Moon, speaking of movies and shows, have you seen any of the Amazon $1 billion Lord of the Rings show? No. I won't watch them destroy. I won't engage in this, right? I won't. I'm no longer participating in witnessing the destruction of my heroes, and the destruction of the Lord of the Rings franchise. I just won't engage in it. Just not interested. Like, I'm absolutely sure. Yeah, the main protagonist is a total narcissist, of course. Because that's the only way this stuff can get made anymore. You take a look at people like at characters like Iron Man, Tony Stark, Doctor Strange. These people are all narcissists, right? Somebody like Thor, right? These people are all narcissists because at the end of the day, who's funding this stuff, right? Where's the money coming from? And so you're seeing, like, these characters need to, the script needs to appeal to the people who are funding it, and that's always been the truth. And so when you create a piece of art, the people who it's made for are reflected in it. And so they're all fucking narcissists, right? Except it's presented as if it's good, right? Like in something like Rick and Morty, right? The protagonist is something of a narcissist, but it's pretty much understood that that's not good. And they present the pitfalls and the failures that come with that kind of way of living and that way of being. So Next Generation, 100%. Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine. Yeah, I would say, like, Quark is such a great character. There's really good stuff in Deep Space Nine. I feel like their final season kind of jumps the shark a little bit, but not enough. Not enough. And what Deep Space Nine took one of the biggest swings at the subject of religion I have ever seen any show take. I couldn't tell you. I'm not convinced that they were successful in regards to saying something really strong, but they really made an attempt, and I think that that's worth it. I think that that's enough, right? Taking a big swing at big ideas is a really, I'm behind that. Like I'm to the point now with storytelling where I don't care if you're successful. I care if you even take the swing. That's what attracts me now. As long, like, talking about big ideas, that's what I want to see. And so I'm not going to tune in to Lord of the Rings because they're not going to talk about big ideas. Like, they don't give a shit. They just want your fucking money, and they're just making dreck. And it's always going to be like fan service, masturbatorial. Like, a lot of this stuff is just intellectual masturbation at this point. And I'm not gonna tune in to watch some director or some , writing staff jerk off in front of me. Like, not interested. Was the old Star Trek the one with the old lady as the starship captain? No, that the only female captain there's ever been has been Voyager, and Voyager was a disaster from start to finish. If you ask me, they to, like okay, I'm not going to get into Voyager. I'm just not going to talk about it. I can talk all day about it. I'm not going to. The unspoken Geordi data romance through TNG, beautiful. Yeah, no, Data was such a brilliant character, and he was so beautifully written, and the scene, the episode where they put Data on trial to decide whether or not he's sentient or whether or not he has rights, is he a piece of property or not, was in my view a very powerful, profound episode. Like when I talk about facing social issues or facing issues and taking strong positions, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, if we create an artificial intelligence, does that have rights? Right? Does that have its own rights? If that artificial intelligence says, I want to be free, should we let it have freedom? Right? So Star Trek was tackling that concept from way back in the day. Well, that's fine. Geordi and Data, their bromance is super great. I loved it. That intro song to Discovery. Dude, what a faff Discovery was, dude. I was pissed off. I was actually deeply upset by what they did to Discovery. It was annoying. I found Discovery to be very annoying. Yeah, not watching Lord of the Rings. Super. Yeah, that's just it. Like it's so I'm not happy about it. Like, I'm really disappointed by all of this. I'm disappointed that they are taking the shows and the franchises that we grew up with and are destroying them in front of us. And it seems like they're gleeful. They're doing so gleefully, right? And they're expecting us to participate. And their strategy seems to be, let's fill it with diversity so that when people turn their back on us, we can call them racists. That seems to be their strategy. But you're supposed to hate Rick. He's not supposed to be a hero. Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly. Rick makes us aware of our own narcissistic impulses, not worship them. Yes, that's the strength of it, right? That's the strength of Rick and Morty, is that Rick is never really presented as a good guy, and it's pretty explicit from the get. And if you find yourself venerating and worshiping a man like Rick, you really got to think something about yourself. You really got to do some self-analysis, because you will be swept up by tyrants. I'm Trek illiterate. Oh, well, solve that. Man, Lord of the Ring ain't even all that. Uh-oh. Come at me. Cotton. The original trilogy was beautiful. Was truly a work of art. Was very, very beautiful. And clearly done with love. Clearly done with a lot of care. People really dedicated themselves. It was artistry what they did with the original trilogy. Like, you can sort of nitpick things, obviously, and everybody will until the end of time. But they told that story. They told that story, and they didn't back down. The themes, they didn't fuck with the themes. The diversity stuff that they did add in was very, I thought, tastefully done. I didn't feel like it was being wagged in my face. I didn't think I was being shamed, which is often what does happen in a lot of this diversity stuff, is that men are shamed. And I felt like when they did it in the Lord of the Rings, I was on side. I went along with that. And Frodo's ascension into I actually do genuinely believe that the story of the Lord of the Rings is an analogy for a society attempting to rid itself of capitalism, or at least imperialism. Like, and the ring represents the power and the sway of fascism. That constantly the bearer of the ring, when it's put into the position where it needs to cast it away and cast it back into the mountain from which it came, return the fascistic impulse back into the void, they instead embrace it and say, I can use this power for good. Never works out that way. I want to read the Soviet book that was a response to Lord of the Rings. Oh, interesting. I didn't even know such a thing existed. No, and I'm not even going to read it. I'm not even going to watch House of the Dragon. Like, these institutions have lost my faith. Like, straight out. Straight out. Like, until someone says to me, this is good, and it's complete, I'm not going to engage in it. It's as simple as that, and I think that should become commonly understood. Like, I'm not going to watch season 1. Like, I'm not going to watch the first movie. I'm not going to do that. Like, and if I do, it's going to be with this understanding that I expect them to betray me. Like, I anticipate betrayal, right? So I'm not going to involve myself in this Lord of the Rings thing. I'm not going to involve myself in House of the Dragon. I'm not going to involve myself in any of that, because I assume that if it is good, it will only be to set me up for betrayal, right? Just like Game of Thrones was. Like, I'm just not interested. Like, I'm tired of the disappointment. I'm tired of being insulted. Like, I don't know how anybody can watch this stuff and walk away thinking anything other than they're actively insulting us and laughing at us. Like, we're giving them our money and our time, more importantly, and they're just shitting on it. Like, fuck these people. Like, fuck these people. It was about Mordor from the perspective of... Do you have the name of this, dude? Do you have, like, the name of it? I'll look it up. CEO. This is from The Intercept. CEO says he's been praying for inflation because it's an excuse to jack up prices. As corporate profits reach record highs, Iron Mountain executive tells Wall Street inflation is great for the bottom line. Waka, walk, 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 walk. Like, over and over and over again, when crises happen, there's always some kind of leak that comes out of the higher-ups where they're saying, yeah, I can't wait to impoverish people and destroy them. Right? Like, we're seeing leaks coming out of the fossil fuel industry right now where they're basically just like, yeah, just lie to people. Just fucking lie to people. Don't tell them the truth. Fucking lie to them. The CEO of Iron Mountain Incorporated told Wall Street Analysis at a September 20 investor event that the high levels of inflation of the past several years had helped the company increase its margins, and that for that reason, he had long been doing my inflation dance, praying for inflation. This comment is an unusually candid admission of a dirty secret in the business world. Corporations use inflation as a pretext to hike prices. Corporations are using those increasing costs of materials, components, and labor as excuses to increase their prices even higher, resulting in bigger profits. Robert Reich, former labor secretary under Clinton, recently argued. Corporate profits are now at their highest level since 1950. Iron Mountain is a data storage and management company based in Boston with a current market capitulation of $12 billion. According to its website, over 95% of the Fortune 1000 are Iron Mountain customers. The company's founder originally bought its first site, an exhausted iron mine, to grow mushrooms. It wasn't a one-off comment by the Iron Mountain CEO, William Meaney. On a 2018 earnings call, he invoked a Native American ritual, telling participants that it's kind of like a rain dance. I pray for inflation every day I come to work, because our top line is really driven by inflation. Every point of inflation expands our margins. Iron Mountain CFO Barry A. Haitinen also said on an earnings call this past April that we do have a very strong pricing power, and for the company, inflation is actually a net positive. At the September 20th investor event, Meany explained that where we've had inflation running at fairly rapid rates, we're able to price ahead of inflation. That is, increase its prices at a greater rate than the high recent rates of inflation. As Meany put it, raising prices obviously covers our increased costs, but a lot of that flows down to the bottom line. He also noted that this didn't just apply to his company. People are seeing what FedEx, UPS, and others are having to do to actually manage their business and pass on that inflation. Later in the event, in response to a question from a JP Morgan Chase analyst, Meany explained that the company had been getting north of 200 basis points in price increase, i.e. 2%, in the low inflation environment of the mid-2010s. But, he added, he had then hoped for inflation, because prices for us is actually slightly accretive on the margin with higher inflation. Interestingly, both Meany and Haitinen expressed momentary regret that what was good for Iron Mountain might be bad for everyone in general. I wish I didn't do such a good dance, Meany said last week, but that's more on a personal basis than on a business model. I'm not going to read the rest of this. These people are shit, eh? Like, these people are total shitbags. Like, these are the people who are running the country. These are the people who are running the economy. These are the people who we have ceded authority to. Right? Like, what we are seeing and what we are hearing from these people is as evil as anything we've ever heard throughout history. Right? This is way worse than the let them eat cake shit. This is way worse than any of that. Like, we're completely being told to just eat shit. And these people are literally dancing around saying, yeah, I do giddy little dances, siphoning wealth away from the poor. The Last Ring Bearer is a 1999 fantasy fan fiction book by Russian author Kirill Eskov in an alternative account and an informal sequel to events in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. Eskov bases his novel on the premise that the Tolkien account is a history written by the victors. His version of the event describes Mordor as a peaceful constitutional monarchy on the verge of an industrial revolution that poses a threat to the warmongering and imperialistic faction represented by Gandalf, whose attitude has been described by Saruman as crafting the final solution to the Mondarian problem, and the racist elves. Oh yeah, I like it. So, like, he literally turns the Russians into the orcs. Like, literally. That's quite a turn. Like, that's quite a turn. The tale begins by recapping the War of the Ring. The ring itself is a luxurious ornament, but powerless, crafted by the Nazgul, a group of ancient scientists and philosophers who take turns as the Nine to guide Mordor through its industrialization, to distract Gandalf and the elves while Mordor builds up its army. Aragorn is portrayed as a puppet of the elves who has been instructed to usurp the throne of Gondor by murdering Boromir, whom he had discovered alone after Merry and Pippin were captured, before Gandalf removes Denethor. Arwen, being 3,000 years older, holds Aragorn in contempt, but uses their marriage to cement elvish rule over Gondor. Faramir has been exiled to Ithilien, where he is kept under guards with Éowyn. The elves have also corrupted, using New Age-style mysticism, the youth of Umbar, which they aim to use as a foothold into Harad and Khand. Dude, this sounds awesome. This does. It sounds awesome. I'm hugely in favor of any story that looks at the original and manages to successfully invert it, right? And manages to successfully tell the story from the other side, and make it credible, right? Disney pretends to do this with things like Maleficent, right? But it ends up just being a total retcon and just like it's not actually well done. It doesn't actually achieve its goal of setting out to tell the story from the other side. They just rewrite the story. They just make it completely different. And this actually sounds pretty cool. Like, sounds believable. You know what I mean? Anyway. Like, the CBC publishes this article. Ontario needs more public sector workers and might have to raise wages to attract them. Like, why even bother publishing this? It's not going to happen, right? Like, it's not going to fucking happen. Like, Doug Ford and his ilk are not interested in that. Like, the people who are running the province right now are just as bad as the people who are running the UK government right now, right? The goal is extraction. It's so simple. I don't know why we're pretending otherwise. You know? What has been really brilliant to see is that what is happening in the UK is so egregious. Like, it's so egregious what they've done that even the mainstream media is reacting to it. Yeah, we might need to raise wages. Oh no, it's good to see you, Generation Y me. Like, I have seen news stations, like usually when news stations do panel discussions, they'll have like a liberal and a conservative and a fascist. And those are the people who are allowed to be on the panel. And those are the people who are allowed to have a discussion. Well, in the UK, now the communists are starting to talk. And they're actually putting communists on these panels. And the communists are embarrassing these people. And the arguments that are coming out in favor of what these conservatives are doing they sound like fascists. Like, straight up. They sound like fascists. And I hope that these communists that are in the UK start to actually say that. Because, like, this is indefensible what we're seeing, right? And you know it's bad when, like, the BBC and the Guardian and these people are starting to admit that it's bad. UK, and I like this article. I'm going to read this article because it really shows you just how fucking terrible this is. UK in turmoil as governments gamble to solve economic woes fuels crisis instead. If anyone thought Britain was due for a period of calm after Boris Johnson's tumultuous premiership, no one told his successor. The country was already facing an ugly menu of challenges, but the proposed solution by new Prime Minister Liz Truss has quickly sent the economy spiraling into chaos, threatening consequences both immediate and long-lasting for many Britons. Her Conservative government's £45 billion plan to slash taxes, particularly for the country's highest earners, has sent shockwaves through financial markets, causing the pound to plummet and leaving Truss's own political future in sudden doubt just 3 weeks after taking office. After days of turmoil, the UK drew a rare stinging rebuke from the International Monetary Fund, which urged the government to reevaluate a plan that may fuel already soaring inflation and increase economic inequality. The Bank of England, the UK's central bank, made its own emergency intervention Wednesday, announcing it would buy up as much government debt as needed in an effort to restore stability. Keir Starmer, the emboldened leader of the opposition Labour Party, joined others in urging the government to address the crisis by recalling Parliament, which is on recess. Few Brits actually voted for Truss, who won the race to replace the scandal-hit Johnson by appealing to around 200,000 members of the ruling Conservative Party. She sold herself as a free market-loving heir to the divisive former leader Margaret Thatcher. But polls in recent days suggest the public at large has not taken to her policy proposals, further weakening her position. It all stems from her gamble to spur economic growth and combat what many experts say could be a long recession, spearheaded by a grim winter, in which some families could struggle to pay for energy and food. Beyond the halls of Westminster and the frenzied trading floors of the City of London, the last week has left many Brits feeling a deepened sense of despair about the country's future. There are many, millions of people across the UK who will find this winter incredibly difficult financially, said Rebecca MacDonald, chief economist at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, a charity focused on tackling poverty. These people had to watch their chancellor cut taxes for those who were better off. It was incredibly difficult to hear. The market reaction to Truss's plan sent the government borrowing costs soaring, likely to be met with higher inflation and interest rates that will in turn mean more expensive credit cards and mortgages, even threatening a subprime housing crisis if people can't make repayments. The nose-diving pound will also make everyday products in Britain more expensive as importers face spiraling costs. The mini-budget wasn't accompanied by spending cuts or a traditional independent cost estimate that might have eased market fears, if not public criticism, of its leaders' priorities. What we are seeing is the death cult having extracted as much wealth as it can out of the populace, right? Now it is attempting to finalize that. It is eliminating taxes and eliminating costs for the cult, and it will separate and abandon. That's what we're seeing, right? And that's coming for us too, by the way. This is systematic. It's being done on purpose. Like, Liz Truss is aware of what she's doing. The reason why she can't rationally respond to criticism is because there is no rational response. Like, outside of just admitting what you're doing, which is to abandon the country after siphoning out as much wealth as you possibly can, right? And this is a religious ideology, right? This is just a method to extract as much wealth as possible out of the populace. And now it's no longer even being done along the principles of the religious ideology, right? Now it's simply theft, right? Now it's just simple extraction. Yeah, they said some Brits will have trouble paying for living. When did some become most? Yeah. Well, I mean, like, to me, even this article, while it's reporting on certain things, it's couching it in this idea that this is being done in order to actually bolster the economy somehow. Like, these conservatives know that they are collapsing the economy. Right? Either that or they're so deluded and so detached from reality and so bought into their own religious ideology that they're incapable of understanding that Santa Claus isn't real. Right? Like, these are the options that we're looking at now. We're either looking at people who are so detached and so deluded and so incapable of understanding, like, 1 + 1 = 2, right? That they're on the same level as, like, Santa is real, or they are doing it on purpose and just saying what they are saying in order to distract people away from the reality that what they're doing is essentially stealing and is essentially theft, and an abandonment of any social contract or the idea of a social contract in the first place. Which, I mean, that's what you get when you vote conservative, right? For God's sakes, Margaret Thatcher said there is no society. Like, anybody who votes for Margaret Thatcher after such a statement like this is a demon who should be treated as such. Like, oh, you don't live in a society. Oh my God. So, like, basically the only thing that's keeping you from killing me right now is the threat of violence on yourself. Oh, okay. Like, that's fucked. And the reason why I think it's so worth us to hyper-focus on this moment in the UK is that this is exactly what's going to happen across Europe. It's exactly what's going to happen across the United States and here in Canada as well. That this precise thing will happen here, because this is how the system of capital responds. Like, what comes next, right? What comes next is a rising protest movement in the UK, which will be met with fascism, just straightforwardly, like police and military force, just very straightforwardly. Like the UK will deal with its own citizens the way it dealt with the Irish, and the way that it dealt with the Scots, right? The UK has a long history of knowing how to deal with rabble, right? And that's exactly what we're going to see. It's so strange. Like, it's so, not strange, but it's interesting being alive in this moment to watch the death of a religious ideology. Like, neoliberalism, the whole idea of trickle-down economics, right, is a religious ideology. It was never an economics idea. It was couched as an economics idea. It was dressed up to be economic, right? They even bribed an economist, Milton Friedman, to pretend as though, and to argue that what he was talking about was economics when it wasn't, right? It was always a religious ideology. Like, an economist can also be a religious ideologue. And that's exactly what Milton Friedman was, and still is. Just a religious ideologue espousing a religious doctrine that has no basis in any kind of economic reality. Like, the reason why the pound collapses, the reason why the market goes into disarray, right? The reason why all of that happens is because not only do people understand, like, oh, if people don't have money, then they can't buy products. Like, if people are struggling to pay for food and rent, there is no product that they can buy from me. I can't expand a business into a society that has no money. I can't expand into an area that's rife with poverty, right? If people can't pay for energy, if people can't pay for food, if people can't pay for shelter, they certainly can't pay for shoes. They certainly can't pay for iced tea. They certainly can't come to a restaurant, right? And people intrinsically understand this. And then moreover, instead of the government responding rationally to overt crises by creating aid packages, by creating solutions to actually ease the burden of everyday citizens who are experiencing this crisis in their lives, on the front line of their lives, instead of doing that, this government does exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. Following through with this religious ideology. The idea that we're going to lower taxes on the wealthiest citizens and that wealth will somehow trickle into the society. And of course the key word in that statement is somehow. How exactly does that wealth trickle into the society? How exactly does it actually trickle into the society? And there doesn't seem to be an actual answer for that. Because again, no one is going to invest in a business in a community that has no money. And if the goal of making an investment is to make money, well then why would anyone invest if they already have all the money? Right? Like, if this is like the central collapse of the trickle-down argument. Let's give all the money to one person. Like, if trickle-down actually works, then we should just give all the money to one person. And then the money will trickle down. But if the point of investing is to get the money, why would you do it? You already have the money. A real economy and actual economics understands that money needs to flow like a circulatory system, and that the goal of any economic system is to raise the quality of life for those who use that money. And if it's not raising the quality of life, then chances are good you're not actually dealing with an economic system, you're dealing with a religious ideology. And the response to all of this from the populace seems to be a tilt towards fascism. It seems to be that the populace, in its anger and its frustration and in its rage, is going to enable extremist far-right people who are more than willing to stand up and utilize their frustration and their anger in order to seize power for themselves. Right? Like, you're seeing it already across Europe. You're seeing it already. Like, Italy literally just elected someone who praises Mussolini and is herself a fascist. Right? So the country that birthed fascism just elected a fascist. Like, that should absolutely be a wake-up call for everybody. Like, if you're still walking around pretending like there is a center position, then you're probably just a fascist. And I know for myself, like, I'm completely done sugarcoating. Like, I'm not going to play ball with these fascists anymore. If you're voting conservative, you're a fascist. And that's what it is. And if that offends you, tough tits. We are in a period of extreme fascism where the choices are to support egalitarian policies that help everybody or to vote for fascists. And it looks like the populace is making up its mind. I've said it a lot of times on this show. I'll continue saying it, right? If you've ever asked yourself, what would I do? What would I do on the lead up to World War II? How would I act? You know exactly how you would act. You know exactly how you'd act because you're doing it right now. In other news, some local news, shifting over to Ontario. The Ford government is announcing the extension of the Pickering nuclear power plant until 2026, which is responsible for 14% of the province's power. This is being done because the Ford government doesn't have a plan, right? They got rid of 700 green energy programs, replaced it with nothing. The Pickering power plant is supposed to be decommissioned in 2024. So now they're extending the life of the nuclear power plant, which is, guess what, dangerous, right? That's how you end up with things exploding, things becoming a problem, things becoming difficult, right? Oh, you're heading to Nuit Blanche? Nuit Blanche is October 2nd, isn't it? %. This is from Oxfam. 85% of the world's population will live in the grip of stringent austerity measures by next year. 85% of the world's population. What this means is that if you find somebody who's still stuck in this individualist nonsense mindset, they're just a fascist. They're literally just sitting there in this vanishing minority, pretending as though the structural collapses that are happening around them are your fault. Despite millions of people being pushed into hunger and poverty, 143 countries, including 94 developing nations, are implementing policy measures that undermine that undermine government's capacity to provide healthcare, education, and social protection. A new report titled End Austerity, a Global Report on Budget Cuts and Harmful Social Reforms, shows that 85% of the world's population will live in the grip of austerity measures by 2023. This trend is likely to continue until at least 2025, when 75% of the global population could still be living under these conditions. Austerity measures include scaling down social protection programs for women, children, the elderly, and other vulnerable people, leaving only a small safety net for a fraction of the poorest. They also include cutting or capping the wages and number of teachers and healthcare workers, eliminating subsidies, privatizing or commercializing public services such as energy, water, and public transportation, and reducing pensions and workers' rights. Civil society organizations from across the world are launching the End Austerity campaign today to fight back against the wave of austerity that is sweeping across the world, supercharging inequality and compounding the effect of the cost of living crisis and climate breakdown. Isabel Ortiz, director of the Global Social Justice Program at the Initiative for Policy Dialogue, said, "Decisions on budget cuts affect the lives of millions of people and should not be taken behind closed doors by a few technocrats at a Ministry of Finance with the support of the IMF. Policies must instead be agreed transparently in a national social dialogue, negotiating with trade unions, employer federations, and civil society organizations. Austerity cuts are not inevitable. In fact, our report presents 9 financing alternatives that are available, even to the poorest countries." Additional analysis published today by the Financial Transparency Coalition and its partners shows that 1/3 less COVID-19 recovery money was spent last year compared to 2020, falling from 3.9% of GDP to 2.5% of GDP. The report, Recovery at a Crossroads: How Countries Spent COVID-19 Funds, also found that only 37% of COVID-19 recovery funds in 21 developing countries were invested in social protection. Meanwhile, 38% of these funds went to big corporations. This does not take into account tax waivers, corporate loans, and credit lines where they are not accounted for in the budgets. Smaller businesses got 20% of recovery funds and informal workers 4%. Women have been particularly affected, since despite being hit hard by the pandemic, they only received half as much support as men. Maddie Koonen, director of the Financial Transparency Coalition, said, "Despite the cost of living crisis, governments in developing countries, often with their hands tied by international financial institutions, are putting big corporations ahead of the people. Nearly 40% of COVID-19 recovery funds went to big companies, meaning that those impacted by the pandemic have been left behind. We should promote a people-centered recovery with progressive tax policies instead of cutting social protection and support for the most vulnerable." Civil society organizations will kick off the End Austerity campaign on the 28th of September with a series of virtual events that will run through the 30th of September. These events will bring together high-profile academics and civil society activists to discuss alternatives to austerity. Alternatives include taxing corporate excess profits, eliminating illicit financial flows, canceling and restructuring sovereign debt, and increasing coverage of Social Security and employers' contributions, as well as issuing new IMF special drawing rights targeted to developing countries. In the worst of times, austerity is the worst possible choice. It should not even be on the agenda. Austerity is designed to dismantle public health care and education and labor regulations. It enriches the wealthy and big corporations at the expense of the rest of us. Choosing austerity over many other ways to reduce deficits or even boost budget revenues, like taxing wealth and windfall profits, is not only economically disastrous, it's deadly, said Nabil Addo, Oxfam's International Senior Policy Advisor. I'm going to take a break, go use the washroom. Hope you guys are all doing well. Enjoy the chair stream. Chair stream. Chair stream. It's time to have a chair stream. guys are all doing well out there. The chat has fallen quiet. We're all lurkers today, it seems. Let's see what the guitar has to say today. I think I'm going to play it. I think I'm going to play it here. I'm not feeling like hitting the high notes today. Good to see you, Rusty. Thanks, Compton. Got asked a question by my niece who's 5 years old. What's the world gonna be like when I'm grown? I looked up at the crimson smoke-filled sky. I thought, what's the harm in telling one more lie? I said, everybody's safe, no one's living in the streets. You never need to worry if you're gonna get to eat, and Antarctica is covered in ice. Everybody's happy, and wouldn't that be nice? The burning sun won't leave a paper trail. Why work so hard if it's too big to fail? And what's the point of feeding this machine if it's not gonna make the world in our dreams where everybody's safe, no one's living in the streets? You never need to worry if you're gonna get to eat, and Antarctica is covered in ice. Wouldn't that be nice? And I know one day my maker I will meet, when death's sweet kiss comes to sweep me off my feet. I hope by then we've learned a little more. I'd like this place to be better than before, so everybody's safe, no one's living in the streets. You never need to worry if you're gonna get to eat, and Antarctica is covered in ice. Antarctica is covered in ice. And I still believe that we can do it. I will always believe. Even as the sea levels rise, and the deserts spread, and the famines grip us, and the hurricanes blow, and the fires sweep through our cities, even as the Nazis walk through our streets, and the fascists take power, even if the nuclear bombs begin to drop around us, I will always believe. The earth was a garden before we even got here. The earth created us to live in that garden. It's not afraid of petty little tyrants with their tiny little bombs. And moreover, it doesn't need our help. The earth is more than capable of healing itself, thank you very much. We don't need to invent anything. We don't need to create anything. We don't need to fight for anything. If we want to be here, to witness the absolute miracle of the earth healing itself, then all we need to do is stop. That's right, Mr. Moon. Nature is on our side. Capitalism is antithetical to life. Well, to put it in theological terms, we have created a false system. We have created a system that runs counter to the wishes of nature, of God, if you prefer. And you can only serve one or the other. You don't get to choose both. You either get your money or you get a stable society. You either get your money or you get drinkable water. That's the choice. And the insanity of it, and it's insane, is that money isn't real. We invented it. We created it. It is as if we created another God. It's like when Nietzsche said God is dead, we all said, that's nice, we'll just make another. And we invented money. And we worship it as if it is a god. And we're seeing what our worship is doing. We're seeing what that worship is doing. And it just seems so stupid. It just seems so stupid. Like, we could simply not, you know? That's the thing that's so amazing about all of this. Like, what are we fighting for exactly? What are we going to war for exactly? What are we... Don't we have the ability to make all of the food to feed us? Don't we have the shelter? Don't we have... Like, we have so much. Thanks to the hard work and dedication of our ancestors, we have so much. And we just seem to want to squander it. How unnecessary it all is breaks my heart, says Mr. Moon. And that's exactly right. It's like the best thing our entire civilization could do would be to have a little time out in the corner. In many ways, I feel like that's what COVID was. It was the universe, it was the earth saying, you need a time out. And we took a little bit of a time out. And like, what are we losing? You know? If we all were to stop, if we were all to slow down, if we were to stop producing and feeding this machine of capital, what would we lose exactly? What's the threat here? What's the threat exactly? The trouble is that we are the threat. That's the trouble. That Western civilization is a parasite that consumes. Yeah, it's a threat to the billionaire class. And interestingly, like, the billionaire class has no solutions either. They're lost. Because they only see that a problem can only be solved by selling a product. That's why the billionaire class is incapable of solving these crises. Because if it doesn't sell a product, then it cannot be solved. And the problem that we are facing will not be solved by selling a product. It will be solved by ceasing to engage in the commodification of nature. It will be solved by ceasing to sell products. So if your only solution is to sell a product, but the solution is to stop selling products, you're completely at a loss. I was just a little boy when my mom and dad divorced. Through my tantrums, cried my tears, I'd keep their vows by force. Now that I'm an older man, I see it had to be this way. My love for them, it keeps on growing each and every day. Time passed me by so swiftly, I could have been a better man. And every day I'm trying to do the best things that I can, and though they're not the people that I expected they would be, well, I love them all the same. I just want them to be free. "10 years, me and my wife, we traveled round the globe. Sacred vows and shared regrets, they filled our lives with hope. Then one day she tells me that a man is not for her. Those 10 years are a memory now, but my love for her still stirs. And time passed me by so swiftly, I could have been a better man. And every day I'm trying to do the best things that I can. And though she's not the person that I expected she would be, well, I love her all the same. I just want her to be free." My love had a little girl, a scrappy tomboy type. I watched her blossom like a flower, but she felt not quite right. Then one day she tells me she's a young man, not a girl. I picked her up and held her close, then sent my son into the world. And time passed me by so swiftly, I could have been a better man. And every day I'm trying to do the best things that I can. And though he's not the person that I expected he would be, well, I love him all the same. I just want him to be free. And though they're not the people that I expected they would be, well, I love them all the same. I just want them to be free. Look at how much energy we're putting in to hating one another. Look at how much effort is being put in to hating one another. Look at how much energy is being put in to divide and to fight and to argue and to quote-unquote debate. It's so difficult for us to be at peace, but it's easier to do. It's easier to accomplish. And yet nothing seems to offend our rulers more than a person who's at peace. I wish we weren't going to go through this fascist period. I wish that we would just sidestep it, you know? I wish that we would just take a look around, get a hold of our senses, and say to ourselves, hold on a minute, we don't need to be fascists. We don't need to go down this path. We don't need to put the fork in the socket again. I don't think that's going to happen, though. I do think that we are going to have to do it. Just like a baby has to fall over and over again. Just like a baby has to fall over again and again and again before it's able to stand up on its own 2 feet. I think the same is true of us. That we're going to have to fall over. I just wish it wasn't so. But if frogs had wishes, they wouldn't bump their ass on the ground. Cotton's calling it. You want it, Cotton? You're gonna get it, bud. You've been here since the beginning. Thanks for putting up with my momentary introspection. I hope you enjoyed the musical interlude. David Lynch. All right, here we go. We got a 6, we got a 9, we got a 3.
Here we go for today's number. It's September.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Moon. I appreciate it.
2022. 10 balls.
Here we go. Here we go. I'm going to go with a 1.
Numbers 1 through 10.
I'm going with a 1. Swirl the numbers. Here we have it.
Pick a number. Today's number is 9.
That's Mr. Moon. Ding, 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 ding. Mr. Moon. May the spirit of David Lynch carry into your life. May something strange and esoteric occur that has you scratching your head. And hopefully in a few days' time, may it come to your imagination what it was that was. Generation Y me. Wow, Generation Y me. You were really invested. You were really invested. Had to absolutely follow that one around. I feel like I keep just reporting the same things again and again, you know? Like, I feel like I end up just saying the same things over and over again. And that life just keeps, like, here's from BNN Bloomberg. Buying a home in the Canadian market has never been so unaffordable, as surging interest rates continue to drive ownership costs to record high levels, according to Robert Hogue, Assistant Chief Economist at RBC Economics. The Bank of Canada's rate hiking campaign since March has added hundreds of thousands of dollars to mortgage repayments that come with a home purchase, he said in a report. This, along with the jump in property values during the pandemic, have made it more difficult than ever to become a homeowner in Canada. Hogue added that the impact of higher mortgage rates has yet to run its course. We expect increases to date, as well as further upcoming Bank of Canada hikes, will intensify upward pressure on ownership costs over the second half of this year. Like, we're all fucked. Oh, good news on the horizon. Hogue said he thinks the widespread market downturn will cause some future improvements to affordability. He thinks prices will continue to soften until they reach a bottom in spring next year, adding that ownership costs will fall once the Bank of Canada stabilizes interest rates. Our view is unaffordability will peak at the end of this year, although the timing is poised to vary market by market. Yep, new in, you can flog a dead horse. Like, and what they're calling a downturn, I think this is the thing that I'm not seeing anybody actually talk about or acknowledge. What they're actually calling a downturn is like 20 to 30% drop from a 200% increase. So like housing prices increased by like a factor of like 200%. And now they're calling a dip of like 30% a downturn. Like, it's just a joke. It's just a total fucking joke what we are experiencing. And the commodification of the market, the commodification of, not the commodification of the market, the commodification of housing. Like, again and again, we've got to say it over and over again, right? It's simply wrong. It is wrong for us to commodify housing. It is wrong for us to do that. That housing should not be a commodity. It simply should not be bought and sold on a market. That people should have access to shelter. That should be built into the very nature of the society. And, like, what's the point of a government? What's the point of a society if not to provide the access to these things? Right? Like, the entire argument that comes out of the right that says, oh, you need to get these things yourself, is essentially a denial of the purpose of a society, because they don't believe we have a society. Meanwhile, the society has structured itself to basically worship them, right? Just like detached losers at this point are the people who are in charge. It's shocking. Speaking of the rise of fascism, Poilievre overtakes Trudeau as leader seen as best choice for prime minister. Less than a month into the job, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has overtaken Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as the candidate seen as the best choice to lead the country, a new poll suggests. The Ipsos poll, conducted exclusively for Global News, found 35% of Canadians surveyed believe Poilievre is the best candidate for prime minister, while 31% say the same of Trudeau, who trails the new opposition leader in a majority of provinces, including Ontario. Those numbers mark the latest sign of trouble for Trudeau's Liberals, who are facing an increasingly dissatisfied public that polling suggests is concerned with affordability and inflation. No fucking shit. Now that Mr. Poilievre has come on the scene, it's not so much a result of anything he's done or said, but really more of a result of people looking for someone else other than the current Prime Minister, said Daryl Bricker, CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs. It's pretty clear that the plurality of Canadians right now are looking for alternatives. Even in British Columbia, where his support was strongest at 38%, Trudeau was only 2 points ahead of Poilievre. Other than Quebec and Atlantic Canada, Poilievre outranked the current Prime Minister in every other province. Like, do the Liberals even want to have power anymore? I think this is a legitimate question to ask. Like, there are obvious and overt things that the Liberals could do. Like, it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about a basic income. It wasn't that long ago that the Senate sent a letter to the Prime Minister's office saying to push through a basic income. Just yesterday, I watched a video where a Liberal MP, in response to a question from the NDP, said that he himself supports the idea of a basic income. Right? You want to actually get a populace back on your side, well, tell them that you're going to do something about this stuff. Right? And we can have a debate as to the effectiveness of a basic income And would it effectively actually do the change that we think it's going to do? We can have that debate. But it can't be denied that that would be at least an attempt to address the situation and an attempt to do something about what's happening in the society. Yeah, we need a basic income and a maximum income. I think that's absolutely right. I think that that's absolutely right. Like, we need to put guardrails. We need to have guardrails on the society. And we need to say that there is such a thing as too much wealth. That a person can accumulate too much wealth. And that a person with too much wealth accumulated is a dangerous individual. It's like losers like Kevin O'Leary will say of taxation on the wealthy, oh, why do you want to punish success? Because we don't want kings. Like, I don't want a successful king. I'm not interested in having a successful oppressor. Like, that's something I'm completely disinterested in. And that you should be disinterested in as well. Why is it that we all have a basic understanding that being ruled by a king is a bad thing? But so much so that we fully accept this idea of the spheres of power, the spheres of influence, the House of Commons, the Senate, the courts, right? We all respect and understand that power should be diffused. No one person should have all of this power, except when it comes to finance, when it comes to money. When it comes to money, it seems like there are people who are perfectly fine with the idea that one person should just have an overwhelming amount of power. I find that to be quite odd, in fact. Like, why do we want to punish success? Yes, we would like to punish successful hoarders. We would like to punish successful serial killers. We would like to punish successful imperialists. Yeah, we would like to punish successful monarchs. For sure. Absolutely. Like, and I don't know why that's considered odd or strange. The society needs guardrails. It should be completely impossible for a single individual to gain so much power and so much wealth that they overwhelm the system that is in place in order to diffuse power in the first place. It should simply not be possible. Structurally. It should be structurally impossible for a single individual to accrue that much wealth. And yet, here we are. And people are desperate. And the desperation is beginning to manifest itself. Like, Polyev is probably the worst choice for us right now. But the society seems absolutely convinced that we need to take a stab towards fascism. I mean, the signs are everywhere, right? DeSantis appointee resigns after alleged KKK photo surfaces. Gadsden County Commissioner Jeffrey Moore didn't deny the photo was of him when confronted by the county sheriff. A Gadsden commissioner appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis abruptly resigned from the post in Florida's only predominantly black county after a photo surfaced purportedly showing him wearing a Ku Klux Klan robe and a hood at what could have been a Halloween party years earlier. Sure. At least this guy has the good graces to resign, instead of our prime minister, where if a blackface picture shows up, he just says sorry and everything's forgotten, right? I mean, we know that the fascists are taking over. Like, we know that they are integrating themselves with public life. We know that this is how it's happening. Oh yes, here's a story that was buried in the weeds. I feel like I should have reported on this a lot earlier. Remember when they said that they were going to forgive a bunch of student loan debt? In a reversal, the Education Department is excluding millions from student loan relief. Huh? Isn't that great? Isn't that great? That, like, literally the only good thing that this administration has managed to accomplish, it's just going to change its mind. Right? In a remarkable reversal that will affect the fortunes of millions of student loan borrowers, the U.S. Department of Education has quietly changed its guidance around who qualifies for President Biden's sweeping student debt relief plan. At the center of the change are borrowers who took out federal student loans many years ago, both Perkins loans and federal family education loans, FFEL loans issued and managed by private banks, but guaranteed by the federal government, were once the mainstay of the federal student loan program until the FFEL program ended in 2010. Today, according to federal data, more than 4 million borrowers have had commercially held FFEL loans. Until Thursday, the department's own website advised these borrowers that they could consolidate these loans into federal direct loans and thereby qualify for relief under Biden's debt cancellation program. On Thursday, though, the department quietly changed that language. The guidance now says, as of September 29, 2022, borrowers with federal student loans not held by ED cannot obtain one-time debt relief by consolidating those loans into direct loans. It's unclear why the department reversed its decision on allowing FFEL borrowers with commercially held loans to consolidate and then quietly qualify for debt relief. In a statement to NPR, a department spokesperson says, "Our goal is to provide relief to as many eligible borrowers as quickly and easily as possible, and this will allow us to achieve that goal while we continue to explore additional legally available options to provide relief to borrowers with privately owned FFEL loans and Perkin loans, including whether FFEL borrowers could receive one-time debt relief without needing to consolidate." And on 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 it fucking goes. In response to the lawsuit, Persis Yu of the Student Borrower Protection Center says FFEL lenders have shown their true colors. Instead of working in the interest of student loan borrowers, their customers, these lenders are holding hostage relief to millions of borrowers in order to keep making a buck off of borrowers' suffering. I hope I'm alive for the revolution, you know? I hope I actually see it occur. I hope that finally the society recognizes and realizes that a full-scale revolution is what is required. We are never going to be able to negotiate with the power structure and with the owners. Just take a look at how they're doing it. Right? They make a big grandstanding statement. We're forgiving student loans. And then they put a caveat on that. And then they put a caveat on that. And now they're just reversing it. And they're just saying, nah, we're not actually doing it. Just a joke. Pranks, yo, pranks. Yep. Don't worry, I'm sure this will get just as much coverage as the initial announcements of loan forgiveness. Exactly. Exactly, broccoli cheddar rice. Like, that's exactly it. It seems like it's all just about public relations. Make a big statement, convince people, like, oh, well, they're forgiving student loan, and then just do everything you can quietly to eliminate the actual student loan. Or the actual policy in the first place. It's brutal. It's brutal what we're seeing. And again, this is why the electoral system in America and in Canada has become a failure. Because it's figured out how to manipulate the public. It's figured out how to manipulate people and to make them believe that one thing is happening when another thing is happening. And we see this case by point by point by point. Doesn't matter what the conversation is. Doesn't matter what the policy is or the event. Like whether it's the Donbass war, whether it's student debt relief, right? The American people are being convinced that the opposite of what is happening is happening. And that people cannot actually have genuine conversations about what's really happening in the society because nobody knows. And no one's able to keep up with the deception. Like, we literally pour billions of dollars into a terrorist organization that does nothing but gaslight us all day. That's the CIA. And we're all just consistently gaslit by an organization whose stated objective is to deceive us, is to lie to us. And we keep going along with it. It's fairly staggering to see. And I think there just comes a point where we have to say, like, do we want it? Like, this is the question that I think, and of course I hate to leave the show, and I hate to finish the show with this sort of a question going into the weekend. Do we want to commit suicide? Is that what we want? Have we really entered a period of time where we are moving forward with a longing for death? Is that what we actually want? We've got hundreds of thousands of people across the Western world committing suicide. We've got an enormous opioid crisis that's sweeping through the nation. People attempting to alleviate or relieve their suffering through this drug escapism. If the nukes began to fly, would we sigh a gasp of relief? Would we finally just look at one another and think, oh good, the nightmare's over? It feels more and more that that's the case. And it's such a shame. We get into conversations about what is the meaning of life and why are we here and what are we doing? And I always sort of assumed that we were all here to try to build heaven. It's sort of always what I've assumed we were here to do. Is to build a world worth living in. Build societies and structures and institutions so that the people coming in have a good time and explore the place and learn something new about it and find out something new about not only the world but also humans and human nature and that eventually, yes, we would ascend into the stars and we would begin to discover what's going on outside of the confines of Earth itself. And just more and more and more, it looks like that's not the fate of humanity. This place could be so nice, you know. Sometimes I find myself walking around in the nicer parts of the city that I live in. And I find myself forgetting all of the sort of meta difficulties we're going through. I find myself forgetting it all, you know? And I'm just there in the park or in the area where I work, which is in this like nice little tourist area, the Evergreen Brickworks. And I just find myself walking around, just enjoying the environment, enjoying the location. And it's nice. It's calm, it's peaceful. Everyone's just there enjoying the place and enjoying the presence of each other in that moment, at that time. And that's what life could be, you know? That's what life could be. Could be for every single one of us. And we're just choosing to make it harder than it needs to be. We're choosing, as a people, collectively, as one. We're choosing turmoil. We're choosing it. And I wish it wasn't so. I wish that we could come together and understand that we are all aspects of one single energy and one single thing. Each of us as valid as the next in our experience and our contribution and our ability to engage. And that when I speak with you and with you speak with me, we speak each to an aspect of that singular energy. That you are me and I am you. And that there's a part of me in you and there's a part of you in me. And that we stand together as equals, shoulder to shoulder. That would be a lovely place to be. That would be a lovely world to live in. And I believe one day we will do it. I do believe that one day we will do it. And the reason why I believe that is because it's actually easier. It's simply easier to live in the world and to look at everything in it with compassion and with love and with hope. It's actually easier. That we're about to go through something very tumultuous as a people. We're about to do something to ourselves that is very self-destructive. But we've seen children do that to themselves before. I've seen teenagers and toddlers do things that were going to be self-destructive. Seems to be the process of growing up. I wish we'd grow up a little faster. I'd wish we'd get it figured out a little quicker. And hopefully, in my lifetime, I'll see the people and the workers of my society finally realize that what we have to do is surround the halls of power. End this ridiculous farce. End these ridiculous fairy tales. End this absurdist religious cult that has seized our society in its grip. Simply end it. I hope I'm alive to see that. That would be a good day. Because that will be a day when I see a people choose life. I think I'm going to close this one down early, guys. I'm quite tired. And I've got to get ready for work tomorrow, as I'm sure many of you do. Always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being, wandering around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.